Ever wonder what happens when U.S. presidents finish their terms? They don't just vanish into thin air. Let's dig into the not-so-quiet retirements of America's commanders-in-chief. Part 1. It's less shuffleboard and more drama, paperwork, and yes, even some old-fashioned farm life. But before you begin, don't forget to subscribe. George Washington. After 2 terms at the helm, George Washington couldn't wait to swap his presidential digs for the rustic charms of Mount Vernon. This founding father turned his energies to agricultural innovation. Think an 18th century Elon Musk, but with more manure and less Twitter. He experimented with crop rotation and livestock breeding, aiming to make his estate a model of efficiency. But retirement wasn't all about playing in the dirt. George also had to fend off endless visitors and political opinion seekers, proving you can take the man out of politics, but you can't take politics out of the man. John Adams. Post-presidency. John Adams got busy with his quill, becoming the BFF pen pal of Thomas Jefferson after a rocky relationship while in office. Their letters filled volumes, capturing insights on everything from governance to gardening. Adams's farm in Quincy wasn't just a retreat. It was a thinking man's fortress where he pondered democracy's fragilities and his own legacy. And let's not forget his front row seat to his son, John Quincy Adams' rise to the presidency. Talk about keeping it in the family. Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson's post-presidency was like a season of fixer-upper, but with more intellectual swagger. At Monticello, Jefferson's architectural experiments were grand, but his pet project was the University of Virginia. His vision? Education as a cornerstone for democracy. Sadly, his spending habits were as grand as his ideas, leading to mountainous debts. Despite financial woes, his estate became a laboratory for all sorts of inventions, from new plows to cipher wheels. James Madison. James Madison, the architect of the Constitution, didn't just kick back with a cold-won post-presidency. He retreated to Montpelier, where he became America's first constitutional commentator. Meticulously, he edited his notes from the Constitutional Convention before they were published, ensuring his legacy was as polished as the silver at his estate. When not buried in papers, Madison played host to a bevy of intellectuals and politicians, doling out advice and staying politically engaged without ever leaving his Virginia estate. James Monroe. James Monroe might have crafted the Monroe Doctrine, telling European powers to keep their hands off the Americas, but his personal finances were a disaster. After his presidency, he tried to get Congress to reimburse him for personal expenses he'd incurred while serving as minister to France and Britain, but obviously with little success. Broke and burdened, Monroe moved to New York City to live with his daughter. His final years were spent in relative obscurity, a stark contrast to the bold international policies he championed. John Quincy Adams. After a bruising presidency, John Quincy Adams didn't just retire, he re-fired. He headed straight back to the political arena as a U.S. congressman, a position he held for 17 years until his death. Not one to go quietly, Adams became a vocal advocate against slavery and for Native American rights, earning the nickname Old Man Eloquent. Imagine going from commander-in-chief to the House's chief agitator. Talk about a career pivot. Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson's retirement was anything but retiring. He returned to his Tennessee plantation, the Hermitage, but stayed heavily involved in Democratic Party politics, influencing decisions and mentoring successors, like a political godfather. When he wasn't shaping the future of the party, Old Hickory was fighting off creditors to keep his estate afloat. Picture him. A cane in one hand and a bundle of fiery letters in the other, battling to maintain his legacy. Martin Van Buren. After leaving the White House, Martin Van Buren returned to his New York estate Lindenwold in Kinderhook. Not content with quiet country life, he attempted 2 more runs at the presidency under the Free Soil Party, focusing on the anti-slavery movement. Think of him as the political equivalent of a rock star on a reunion tour, always trying to hit the big time once again. William Henry Harrison. William Henry Harrison holds the record for the shortest presidency, lasting just a month before dying of pneumonia. His post-presidential life was, well, non-existent. His real legacy, serving as a stark reminder of the harsh unpredictability of life and the importance of wearing a coat on a cold inauguration day. John Tyler. After his unexpected presidency due to Harrison's untimely demise, John Tyler retired to his Virginia plantation, Sherwood Forest, deeming it a safe haven from his critics. But retirement couldn't keep him down. He eventually sided with the Confederacy during the Civil War, even winning election to the Confederate House of Representatives. Picture Tyler as the political world's comeback kid, always finding a new, if controversial, path back into the fray. James K. Polk. James K. Polk headed back to Tennessee with plans to kick up his feet and enjoy some well-deserved rest. Sadly, the universe had other plans. Just 3 months post-presidency, Polk passed away from cholera. His retirement was shorter than a summer fling. Intense and over before you know it. How's that for a work-life balance? Zachary Taylor. Zachary Taylor's post-presidency was, to put it bluntly, non-existent. He died 16 months into his term from what seemed to be acute gastroenteritis after chowing down on raw fruit and iced milk at a July 4th celebration. His time post-White House was as brief as a cameo in a sitcom. Blink, and you missed it. At the end of the list, share us which retirement plan you wish you can have in the future, and which one that makes you scream out, "No thanks," Millard Fillmore. After his presidency, Millard Fillmore wasn't ready to quit politics. He threw his hat back in the ring with the Know-Nothing Party but didn't snag the presidency. Picture him as the band trying to make a comeback with a reunion tour that nobody asked for. Post-politics, Fillmore played the elder statesman role in Buffalo, New York, dipping his toes in local charities and education boards. Ever feel like trying again even when everyone says to sit down? Franklin Pierce. Franklin Pierce might have left the presidency, but he couldn't leave the drama behind. He returned to New Hampshire only to become the nation's most melancholic ex-president, wrestling with personal grief and a tarnished reputation. His post-presidency was like a bad movie sequel, sad and unnecessary. Imagine having all the time in the world and not a friend in sight to share it with. James Buchanan. James Buchanan spent his retirement years in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, desperately trying to justify his lackluster presidency as the nation edged closer to civil war. It was less golden years and more writing lengthy defenses of his actions, or lack thereof. Think of him as that one guy always arguing his point in the comments section, refusing to just log off. Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln's story post-presidency is a poignant chapter that never got to unfold. Assassinated just as his second term was beginning, his plans for a gentle reconstruction and a return to normalcy were tragically cut short. Lincoln's post-presidency leaves us with a what could have been that's as haunting as any ghost story. Could he have healed a fractured nation? We can only speculate. Andrew Johnson. After surviving a contentious impeachment, Andrew Johnson didn't just fade into the background. Instead, he did what seemed unthinkable. He got himself elected to the Senate, making a comeback that's kind of like a band getting back together for one last tour, except nobody really asked for this encore. Johnson's final years were marked by his staunch defense of his presidency and a relentless quest to shape how history would remember him. Ulysses S. Grant. Post-presidency, Ulysses S. Grant took a victory lap around the world that would make any rock star jealous. He hobnobbed with queens and commoners alike, and then, facing financial ruin, penned his memoirs, which are hailed as among the finest from any president. His writings not only secured his family's financial future, but also cemented his legacy as a thoughtful leader and shrewd observer of the human condition. Rutherford B. Hayes. Rutherford B. Hayes might have left the White House under the cloud of a contested election, but he embraced his post-presidential life with gusto. Hayes focused on educational reform and prison reform, showing a passion for advocacy that might have surprised his critics. Picture Hayes as the retired CEO who finds a second career as a philanthropist. Turns out, he had a knack for it. James A. Garfield. James A. Garfield's potential post-presidential life was stolen by an assassin's bullet, ending his term just 200 days after it began. His presidency might have been brief, but the reforms he began, particularly in civil service, hinted at a promising second act that was brutally cut short. Garfield's story is less about what he did after the presidency and more about what could have been. An innovator interrupted. Chester A. Arthur. After his unexpected presidency, Chester A. Arthur returned to New York, intent on enjoying a peaceful retirement. However, his health rapidly declined and he passed away just 18 months after leaving office. Arthur's post-presidency was as dignified and reserved as the man himself, focusing on his personal affairs and continuing his lifelong penchant for fine attire and dignified leisure. Grover Cleveland. Unique among presidents, Grover Cleveland served 2 non-consecutive terms, which meant he had 2 stints of post-presidential life. After his first term, he returned to New York to work at a law firm but stayed politically active, paving the way for his unprecedented second term. After finally retiring for good, Cleveland settled in Princeton, New Jersey, where he became a trustee for Princeton University and occasionally commented on public affairs, always maintaining a strong presence in the community until his death. Benjamin Harrison. After losing his re-election bid, Benjamin Harrison returned to his home in Indianapolis, where he resumed his law practice. He also embarked on a new role as a law lecturer at Stanford University, sharing his extensive knowledge and experience with eager young minds. Harrison remained active in public life, advocating for veterans' rights and international peace. demonstrating a lifelong commitment to service beyond the White House. William McKinley. William McKinley's presidency and subsequent post-presidential plans were tragically cut short by his assassination in 1901, 6 months into his second term. His brief post-presidency period was marked by national mourning and reflection on his leadership during a time of significant economic and imperial expansion. McKinley's legacy was largely shaped by his successors who revered his leadership style and policies. Theodore Roosevelt. After his presidency, Theodore Roosevelt initially went on an African safari, a venture that epitomized his vigorous and adventurous spirit. Not one to fade into the background, Roosevelt returned to politics, running for president in 1912 as a third-party candidate, which ultimately split the Republican vote and led to the election of Woodrow Wilson. Roosevelt continued to write, explore, and stay heavily involved in international affairs and progressive political causes until his death in 1919. Which of these post-presidential paths do you find most intriguing? Could you see yourself embracing a similar journey after a major career milestone? Share your thoughts and subscribe, and we'll see you in part 2.